"You're testing my patience," he said, lowering his voice. "I can fine you for contempt of court. $15,000, Miss Crockett, and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Is that what you want?" Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and look forward to tomorrow's incredible tale. Now let's dive into the story. The Dallas County District courtroom smelled of old wood and tense anticipation. The ceiling fan hummed, barely cutting through the stifling early September heat of 2024. Light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the worn benches where journalists, local activists, and a few curious retirees sat, eager to witness another drama in a city recently buzzing with political scandals. On the docket was a case about voting rights violations, high profile, but not enough to draw national media attention. Yet for those in the room, it was like a spark in dry grass. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Texas's 30th District, stood at the attorney's podium. Her navy blue suit fit perfectly, but tension burned in her eyes. She was representing the plaintiff, a young single mother named Layla Williams, who claimed her name had been unlawfully purged from voter rolls before the local elections. For Layla, this wasn't just a bureaucratic error. It was the loss of a voice in a city where every ballot could change a community's fate. Judge Edward C. Rollins, a man with silver hair and a stern gaze, sat behind the high bench, occasionally tapping his pen against the papers. His reputation was mixed. Some saw him as fair, others as biased against those who challenged the system. Today, his mood seemed particularly grim. "Ms. Crockett," he began, his voice like the crack of a branch in a quiet forest, "I've been hearing this case for 3 days now, and frankly, I'm losing patience. You keep repeating the same thing, injustice, discrimination. But where is your evidence? Concrete, legally substantiated proof." Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the air in the room thicken. She knew Rollins wasn't just testing her arguments, he was testing her endurance. In the corner of the room, Layla sat clutching her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were locked on Jasmine, filled with hope and fear. "Your Honor," Jasmine began, her voice calm but steely, "we've provided documents proving Ms. Williams's name was removed from the rolls without warning or justification. There are testimonies from other voters in the district who faced similar issues. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a systemic practice aimed at enough." Rollins raised his hand sharply, his eyes narrowing. "You're accusing the Election Commission of conspiracy, yet you can't even pinpoint who's responsible. This is a courtroom, Ms. Crockett, not a platform for your political speeches." Silence fell over the room. A journalist from a local paper, a man with a salt and pepper beard, scribbled notes furiously. 2 retirees in the back row exchanged glances, one whispering, "He's clearly provoking her." Jasmine felt her pulse quicken, but refused to let emotions take over. She knew Rollins wanted her to explode, to give him a reason to accuse her of unprofessionalism. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and smiled, not defiantly, but with the kind of confidence that demanded attention. "Your Honor, I respect this court and its rules. But let me clarify, we're not accusing some abstract conspiracy. We're pointing to specific actions that deprived citizens of their constitutional rights. If the court believes these facts aren't worth considering, I'm prepared to present additional evidence. The only question is whether you'll allow us that opportunity." Rollins frowned. Her tone was polite, but her words carried a weight that was hard to ignore. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen faster. "You're testing my patience," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I can fine you for contempt of court. $15,000, Miss Crockett, and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Is that what you want?" A hushed murmur spread through the room. Layla held her breath, her eyes brimming with tears. A bailiff, a young man with a tense expression, unconsciously stepped forward as if preparing to carry out the judge's order. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood tall, her gaze locked with Rollins's, and in that moment, the entire room seemed to shrink to the size of their exchange. "Your Honor," she said, her voice even calmer, almost soft, but with an edge of challenge. If a $15,000 fine is what it takes for this court to hear Ms. Williams's voice, then I'll pay it. But I won't leave this room until I'm sure the truth has been spoken. This isn't about me or my reputation. It's about whether we're willing to admit that the system we defend sometimes fails, and that we can fix it. Rollins froze. His pen hovered in the air. The room fell into dead silence, broken only by the hum of the fan. The journalist stopped writing, staring at Jasmine with undisguised curiosity. The elderly woman in the back, dressed in a faded dress, squeezed her friend's hand and whispered, "Now that's how you shut him down." Rollins slowly set down his pen. His face remained stern, but something flickered in his eyes, maybe respect, maybe irritation. He knew Jasmine wouldn't back down, and every move she made was being recorded by those watching. "You have 5 minutes," he finally said, his voice dry as sand. 5 minutes to present something that convinces me not to dismiss this case. And no theatrics, Miss Crockett. Jasmine nodded, her lips curling into a faint smile. She turned back to her table, where stacks of documents lay, and began preparing. Layla watched her, a spark of hope lighting up her eyes. The room buzzed with whispers again, but this time they were laced with anticipation. Something was about to happen. The next few hours in the courtroom felt like a chess match, each move potentially decisive. Jasmine presented new evidence. Emails between local officials hinting at a purge of voter rolls in certain Dallas neighborhoods predominantly African American and Latino. She called a witness, an elderly man named Mr. Gonzalez, who testified about how his wife, a woman who had voted in every election since the 1960s, had also been struck from her rolls without explanation. "I stood there at the polling station," Mr. Gonzalez said, his voice trembling with indignation but dignified. "And they told me she wasn't in the system. Said she must not have registered. My Elena? She knew her rights better than any of those bureaucrats." The room listened, holding its breath. Even Rollins, who struggled to keep a neutral expression, couldn't hide that the testimony had struck a chord. Jasmine stood nearby, listening intently, but her gaze occasionally flicked back to the judge, as if trying to read his thoughts. But the tension wasn't just about evidence. During a recess, as Jasmine spoke with Layla in the hallway, a man in an expensive suit approached, the defense attorney, Richard Blake. He had a reputation for resolving cases before they concluded. "Ms. Crockett," he began smoothly, "you're making a lot of noise, but let's be honest. This case isn't worth your time. We can settle. Layla gets compensation. Her name goes back on the rolls. But if you push further, it could end badly. For everyone." Jasmine looked at him, her eyebrows lifting slightly. Layla, standing beside her, gripped her bag so tightly the strap creaked. "Mr. Blake," Jasmine replied, her voice calm but laced with sarcasm, "I appreciate the offer, but I think you underestimate how seriously I take the truth. Compensation isn't what Ms. Williams needs. She needs justice. And I'm sure Judge Rollins agrees with me, doesn't he?" Blake smiled, but his eyes remained cold. He nodded and walked away, but Jasmine knew this wasn't over. She turned back to Layla and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "They always do this when they know they're losing." Layla nodded, but doubt clouded her eyes. She knew this fight wasn't just about her vote. It was about thousands of others that might go unheard. When the hearing resumed, the tension in the room grew even thicker. Jasmine called another witness, a voting systems expert who confirmed that the name removals followed an algorithm that coincidentally targeted minorities. Rollins listened carefully, his face unreadable. Then, something unexpected happened. A clerk handed the judge a note. Rollins read it, his brow furrowing, and he called for a 10-minute recess. The room erupted in murmurs. Jasmine felt something heavy tighten in her chest. In cases like these, surprises were rarely good. In the hallway, where she stepped out for air, an elderly woman approached, the same retiree from the back row. Her name was Mrs. Edna, and she had the look of someone who'd seen it all. You're doing important work, she said, her voice raspy but strong. I marched for civil rights in the 60s. They told us we couldn't change anything. But we did, and so can you. Jasmine smiled, feeling Mrs. Edna's words strengthen her resolve. Thank you, she said. But I'm afraid the system might be stronger than us this time. Mrs. Edna shook her head. The system is just people. And people change when they see the truth. Keep speaking, girl. They're listening. When the court hearing resumed, the room buzzed with whispers like a beehive before storm. Jasmine Crockett returned to her seat, her hands resting calmly on a stack of documents. But inside, every nerve was stretched to its limit. The note Judge Rollins had received before the recess left an air of uncertainty hanging in the room. She knew that in cases like these, surprises often meant someone higher up was pulling strings. Rollins banged his gavel, calling for silence. His face was even sterner than before, but something new flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even doubt. Ms. Crockett, he began, his voice like the crack of ice underfoot, I've received information that may affect the course of this case. Before we proceed, I want you to clearly explain why you're insisting on this. He paused, as if searching for the right word. This spectacle. The whispers in the room grew louder. Layla Williams, sitting behind Jasmine, gripped the edge of the table, her nails digging into the wood. The journalist with the salt and pepper beard, who had already filled half his notepad, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Mrs. Edna, the elderly retiree from the back row, sat with her head held high, her gaze fixed on Jasmine as if trying to lend her strength. Jasmine stood, her posture straight as an arrow. She knew Rollins was trying to unbalance her, but she also sensed a shift in his tone. This wasn't just a challenge. It was an attempt to gauge how far she was willing to go. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady but deep, like a river flowing slow and relentless. I'm not putting on a spectacle. I'm representing Ms. Williams and thousands of others whose voices have been silenced by a system that may not be malicious, but is certainly flawed. We're not asking for a revolution. We're asking for justice. And if the court considers that a spectacle, then I'll play that role until the truth is heard. Rollins leaned forward, his brows furrowing. He opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly, the courtroom doors creaked open. A young woman in a business suit entered, carrying a slim folder. She quickly approached the judge's assistant and handed him the papers. The assistant, looking surprised, passed them to Rollins. The judge skimmed the document, and his expression changed. His stern demeanor gave way to something else, shock, maybe anger. He looked up at Jasmine, then at Richard Blake, the defense attorney, who had been sitting with a smug smile but now looked tense. Mr. Blake, Rollins said, his voice low and dangerous, were you aware of this? Blake stood, his smile faltering. Your Honor, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Don't play games with me. Rollins cut him off sharply, holding up the folder. This is an internal report from the Election Commission, dated 3 months ago. It clearly states that the removal of names from the voter rolls was sanctioned at the highest level, without proper notification to voters. Are you telling me your side didn't have access to this document? The room erupted in murmurs. Layla held her breath, her eyes widening. Jasmine felt her heart skip a beat, but she didn't let her emotions show. She knew this moment could change everything, or destroy their case if she misstepped. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm, but with renewed strength. If this report confirms our claims, I request that it be entered into evidence. We also ask to summon representatives from the Election Commission for questioning. People deserve to know why their rights were violated. Rollins looked at her, his gaze heavy but no longer hostile. He nodded slowly. I'll allow it, he said. But I warn everyone, I will not tolerate lies in this courtroom. If this report is genuine, someone will answer for it. Blake shot to his feet, his face reddening. Your Honor, this is absurd. This document hasn't been properly authenticated. We demand. Sit down, Mr. Blake, Rollins snapped. You'll have your chance to challenge the evidence procedurally. But not now. The room buzzed like a crowd before a storm. Jasmine turned to Layla and gave her a barely perceptible nod. Layla responded with a weak smile, her eyes glistening, not with fear, but with hope. The following days were like an obstacle course. The report that surfaced in court was just the tip of the iceberg. Jasmine and her team spent nights analyzing new documents from an anonymous source inside the Election Commission itself. Someone within the system had decided silence was no longer an option. These documents revealed systematic purges of voters from specific Dallas neighborhoods, those where votes could sway local election results. But the truth came at a price. Jasmine began receiving threats, first anonymous calls, then letters hinting she should stop before it's too late. She didn't tell Layla, not wanting to scare her, but she confided in a close friend, David, a former prosecutor, who now worked as a security consultant. "Jasmine, you're stepping on some big toes," he said one evening in her office. Papers scattered across the desk as Dallas glittered outside the window. "These people won't stop at letters." "I know," she replied, rubbing her temples. "But if I stop, who will keep going? Layla? Mr. Gonzalez? They're counting on me." David shook his head, but there was respect in his eyes. "You've always been like this. Just be careful. The movement needs you alive." Meanwhile, rumors spread through the city. Local media picked up the story, and soon, Layla Williams' case became a symbol of the fight for justice. Activists, young and old, black, Latino, white, gathered on the courthouse steps with signs, "Every voice matters," and "Justice for Layla." Mrs. Edna, now attending every hearing, became an unofficial leader of these gatherings, sharing stories of the civil rights movements of the 60s and inspiring the younger generation. But not everyone supported Jasmine. Social media posts accused her of stirring unrest, calling her a political opportunist. One local politician, close to the Election Commission, even publicly claimed she was using Layla to advance her career. The word stung, but Jasmine refused to let them stop her. She knew the truth always faced resistance. On the 5th day of hearings, the courtroom was packed. People stood along the walls. Journalists filled every corner. Jasmine called her final witness Eric Thompson, an IT specialist who had worked for the Election Commission. His name was in the anonymous documents, and after lengthy negotiations, he agreed to testify. Eric, a thin man with a nervous smile, looked like he hadn't slept in days. He took the stand, his hands trembling as he reached for a glass of water. "Mr. Thompson," Jasmine began, her voice soft but firm, "can you confirm that you were involved in developing the algorithm used to update the voter rolls?" Eric swallowed and nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "But I didn't know. I didn't know it would be used like this." "Please explain," Jasmine urged, her gaze encouraging but insistent. Eric sighed and began to speak. He described how he was asked to create a program to optimize voter rolls, but the instructions came from top management with clear directives. Remove inactive voters from specific districts. He hadn't questioned it, assuming it was routine. But when he saw the results, thousands of names purged, mostly from poor neighborhoods, he realized something was wrong. "I tried to tell my superiors," he continued, his voice shaking, "but they told me it wasn't my concern. Then I saw Ms. Williams' name on the list, and I couldn't stay silent." The room fell still. Layla covered her face, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Mrs. Edna squeezed the hand of a young activist beside her, her own eyes glistening. Rollins listened, his face unreadable, but his hand, which had been tapping his pen, went still. Blake tried to object, arguing Eric's testimony was unreliable, but his voice sounded weak, almost desperate. Jasmine turned back to Rollins. "Your Honor," she said, "we've shown you evidence, testimonies, facts. Now the question is, what will we do with this truth? Will we let the system keep silencing voices, or will we admit that even the best systems can fail, and that we have the power to fix them?" Rollins was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "I'm adjourning until tomorrow," he said. "I need time to consider this." When the hearing ended, Jasmine stepped outside to the courthouse steps, where dozens of people waited. Layla stood beside her, gripping her hand. Mrs. Edna approached, her eyes shining. "You did it, girl," she said. "You made them listen." Jasmine smiled, but her heart was heavy. She knew Rollins' decision was still pending, and even if they won this case, the fight for justice would continue. But in this moment, standing among people who believed in her, she felt something new: hope. The next day, Rollins would announce his ruling, but regardless of his words, Jasmine knew one thing: a small step had been taken in that courtroom, and it had already set change in motion. People were speaking up, listening, acting. And this was only the beginning. The morning after in Dallas was clear but cool, with a light wind blowing fallen leaves across the sidewalks. The courthouse steps were already crowded before 8 o'clock. Activists held signs that read in bold letters, "Give us our votes back," and "Justice for all." Local TV vans were parked nearby, and reporters buzzed like a swarm of bees, trying to catch a word from anyone entering the building. Mrs. Edna stood at the center of the crowd, her gray hair tied into a neat bun, holding a small sign that read, 1965, 2025. The fight continues. Her presence gave people strength, reminding them that this case wasn't just about Layla Williams or Jasmine Crockett. It was about something much bigger. Inside the courtroom, the scent of old wood mingled with the aroma of coffee someone had spilled on the floor. The ceiling fan hummed as always, but this time the sound seemed quieter, muffled by tense anticipation. Layla sat at her place, nervously fidgeting with her bag strap. She looked exhausted, but her eyes burned with determination. Jasmine, in her signature blue suit, stood beside her, reviewing her notes. Her face was calm, but her heart was racing like she was running a marathon. Today would decide everything. Judge Edward Rollins entered the courtroom, his robe rustling like leaves in the wind. He sat down and slowly scanned the room: journalists, activists, Layla, Jasmine, Richard Blake, who sat with a tense expression. Rollins struck the gavel, and the whispers in the room fell silent as if by magic. "I've spent a lot of time considering this case," he began, his voice low and measured, yet heavy with meaning. "I had to weigh the facts, the testimonies, and what lies behind them. This court is not a place for politics or personal beliefs. It is a place for truth. And the truth we've uncovered here demands action." Jasmine felt her breath catch. Layla squeezed her hand beneath the table, and Jasmine responded with a gentle squeeze back, as if to say, "We're in this together." The room was so quiet they could hear a reporter's pen scratching across the page. Rollins continued, "Based on the evidence presented, including the internal report from the Election Commission and Mr. Thompson's testimony, I conclude that the removal of Ms. Williams's name from the voter rolls was part of a broader pattern that violated her constitutional rights. Moreover, this pattern affected many other citizens whose voices were silenced without proper cause." The room erupted in whispers, but Rollins raised his hand for silence. "I hereby order that Ms. Williams's name be immediately reinstated on the voter rolls," he said. "Additionally, I order a full investigation into the Texas Election Commission's practices regarding voter roll updates over the past 2 years. This court cannot fix every flaw in the system, but we can take the first step." Layla covered her face, her shoulders trembling with tears of relief. Jasmine felt a weight lift off her, but she didn't allow herself to relax. She knew this was just the beginning. Rollins looked at her, and in his eyes flashed something like respect. "Ms. Crockett," he said, "your persistence made my life difficult, but it also reminded me why I chose this job. Don't abuse it." Jasmine gave a faint smile. "I'll try not to, Your Honor." Richard Blake sat in silence, his face pale. He knew this defeat would have consequences not just for his clients, but for himself. Reporters were already rushing out of the courtroom to break the news. Mrs. Edna, sitting in the back row, clasped her hands and whispered, "Thank God." After the storm, when the hearing ended, Jasmine and Layla stepped onto the courthouse steps to a roar of applause. The crowd chanted, "Justice! Justice!" Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Jasmine raised her hand, asking for silence. She turned to Layla and motioned her to the microphone. Layla exhaled. Her voice trembled, but she spoke. "I just wanted to vote. I wanted my voice to be heard. And because of Jasmine, because of all of you, I got that chance. Thank you." The crowd erupted in cheers. Jasmine stood beside her, eyes glistening, but she didn't let the tears fall. She knew this wasn't her moment. It was Layla's, Mr. Gonzalez's, Mrs. Edna's, and all those who had fought for years to be heard. Mrs. Edna approached Jasmine, her hand trembling as she placed it on the Congresswoman's shoulder. "I knew you'd do it," she said. "But this isn't the end, is it?" Jasmine nodded. "It's just the beginning." That evening, Jasmine sat in her office, gazing at the Dallas skyline through the window. A stack of new letters lay on her desk, some full of thanks, some full of threats. Her phone buzzed with messages, colleagues offering support, activists inviting her to speak at rallies, anonymous numbers leaving voicemails filled with profanity. She silenced it and leaned back in her chair. David, her friend, walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you need a week of sleep," he said, setting a cup in front of her. "Maybe 2, she replied with a smile. "But first we finish what we started." He shook his head, but his eyes shone with pride. "You changed the game, Jasmine. People are talking about this all over the state, maybe even the country." She sighed, her gaze returning to the city lights. "I just want Layla not to have to fight next time for what's rightfully hers." The following week, the Texas Election Commission announced the launch of an internal investigation. Hundreds of voters' names began to be reinstated on the rolls, though the process was slow and met with protests from both sides. Jasmine returned to her work in Congress, but Layla's case stayed with her, a reminder that every fight matters. Layla enrolled in a community organizing course, deciding she wanted to help others defend their rights. Mrs. Edna became a frequent speaker at local gatherings, sharing stories from the past and inspiring young people. And Eric Thompson, despite fear of backlash, received a job offer from a nonprofit that protected voting rights. Jasmine knew the system wouldn't change overnight. The threats didn't stop, and political opponents grew more aggressive. But whenever she felt her strength fading, she remembered the look in Layla's eyes when Rollins gave his ruling. She remembered Mrs. Edna's words, "The system is people, and people can change." A small step in a courtroom had become the first brick in the foundation of change. And though the road ahead was long, Jasmine believed it was worth it.